Why aren't our prayers working? And Kelly, I'm so honored to be here, but I really think those of you that are watching right now, there's about to be a release of revelation and a warfare spirit that's going to help you overcome, especially if you feel overwhelmed.
Wait, your prayers haven't been answered? I mean, I think that's what they're
Yeah.
saying. Wait, why is he saying that? Is that not just me?
No.
Is that not just them?
No.
I mean, I feel like that question came up.
Yeah. Well, the body of Christ has reached kind of a glass ceiling, it appears, in our effectiveness. And in the last days, there's something really interesting. Revelation chapter 12 and verse 12 says that Satan will come down in the last days in great wrath because he knows his time is short. Now, how sad is it that Satan knows his time is short, but Christians don't know that time is short? But that means that in the last days, there will be an increase in satanic activity. Now, listen, this is wild, this is radical, but I want you to hear this. You might be facing a spiritual attack that the Apostle Paul never had to face. Therefore, your understanding of spiritual warfare must be rooted in the revelation that he gave us in Ephesians chapter 6, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today.
Well, even on the flip side, the apostles in the Bible, when they write, you can find many times where they suggest they didn't have the fullness of what Jesus was. He said, we see this is coming.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yes.
They were saying, we will have it because we can't see it today. It's coming, this fullness. So if Satan is released at a greater measure, you got to know Jesus has been prepared for this, obviously. But what we can't do, I hear people say, I was at a church one time and I saw, the word said unchangeable. And that's not bad if you're talking about God.
Right.
But too many times in our back of our mind, we want to apply that, well, I'm rock solid, that's great. But to say that you're unchangeable is going to mess you up.
Oh, no
today.
Question. We have to be able to evolve.
Yes.
So when we're talking about spiritual warfare in particular, if you look at Ephesians chapter 6, which is the magnum opus of our revelation of spiritual warfare, where the Apostle Paul walks through the armor of God, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against mights, against dominions, against all these kinds of things. And you need to recognize that that's not the first time the Apostle Paul talked about the armor of God. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, which was written 10 years earlier, he talked about the armor of God, but there were only 2 pieces of armor, and that grew in Ephesians chapter 6 to 7 pieces of armor. So there's an evolution, even in a decade, of the Apostle Paul's revelation of spiritual warfare. And then you take into account that Paul is pulling that revelation from the book of Isaiah. So when people in Isaiah's time would have had the revelation of the helmet of salvation, they would have thought about Babylonian armor, Babylonian warfare, whereas now we're talking about Roman armor and Roman warfare. So what that means, Kelly, is that over time, our revelation of warfare increases with our military capability. As we grow in technology and in warfare and in weapons, so should our revelation of our spiritual capabilities. So when we get to the last days now, we finally have weapons that can literally tilt the earth on its axis. That's how powerful these weapons are. Could it be that God is unleashing some weapons from heaven that have the power to shift the earth on its axis? And I think God is opening his armory. This is the mission that he's given me. He told me about 2 years ago, he said, I'm opening my armory and I'm releasing weapons that haven't been seen in generations. So I am determined, I'm seeking out, I know some of you are too, to get a hold of every single weapon that God has empowered me to wield so that I can walk in the victory he's given me. I think we're losing battles because we're using the wrong weapons.
Well, why weren't we losing battles 10 years ago?
Right. Yeah.
And if we want things to go back to when we were winning, that's not the way to see this, is it?
No,
we just want you to win. The futile exercise of wanting everything in our government, in your world, in the spirit, in your spiritual ability and prowess. I use that word, prowess. Your understanding of what God has taught you. You want to go back to that competence. You want to go back to pre-COVID world, but that's not going to happen. But we have even more. That doesn't mean we're going to be behind. We're just in a little learning curve here.
Yeah.
Am I right?
That's exactly right. If you think of 9/11 as an example, on 9/11, everything changed. How many of you remember where you were on 9/11. I remember where I was actually working in an international prayer center. Before I was a minister, I was a prayer. So for years, I ran an international prayer center. And in that time, I prayed for about 100,000 people one-on-one, face-to-face. And I learned a lot about what works, what doesn't work in that time. And I remember being there in the prayer center on 9/11 and the calls we were getting from people in the buildings, from people who had family members that they could not find. It was a dramatic moment in history. And when all was said and done, and after all the dust settled, there was this big commission that came out. How could this happen? How could a ragtag group of terrorists attack and cripple the greatest military power on the face of the earth? And after all of the commissions and after everything was written, here's what they came with. They said, they were at war with us, but we were not at war with them. And that was the reason why we were able to allow that attack to breach our defenses and to come in, because we didn't have warfare awareness. We had become war weary. And I think a lot of people in the body of Christ are just war weary. We're tired of fighting, but now's the time to rise up. The enemy sees us as being weak in this moment, so he's not expecting us to respond with the veracity and the force that I believe that we are going to respond with.
And talk to us about what are these prayer strategies, these weapons that God's given you to unlock our power, our destiny.
Anyone who specializes in self-defense will tell you that if you're in the room with someone who has a knife, someone who has a gun, and someone who is situationally aware, the person who's situationally aware is more than likely the one who's going to come out on top, which is really interesting. So that means if you're simply aware of your surroundings, aware of what's going on, and this is what warfare awareness is, and I go deep into the book in this. Warfare awareness changes everything in your Christian life, and you've got to recognize that everything that we do as believers has a warfare hint to it, because we're always fighting against darkness. We're always pushing back the flesh. There's always something that's trying to keep us out of the glory of God. So here's an example of how warfare awareness can impact your life. Take, for example, something that you do every single day and you don't think about it at all. Going to the grocery store, getting some ice cream. What if you knew that there were some robberies in the parking lot that week? 10 robberies in the parking lot. Would you just kind of be scrolling through your phone, walking through the parking lot to get into the store? Or would your awareness shift? Now you're not scrolling through your phone. Now you have your keys protruding through your fists, or you have your mace, or we're in Texas. You got your hand, whatever, whatever. You're ready for trouble because you're situationally aware. Your head is on a swivel. Our prayer life has got to shift that way. We've got to become situationally aware that we are in a battle and begin praying along those lines, even when we're praying over our food, we're praying for our leaders, our pastors, whatever the situation may be. We've got to get that warfare awareness. So that's number one. Number two, we got to get into unity.
That's big. This
is huge. This is where you have really broken the mold with what you're doing, because you got a lot of crazy friends, Kelly.
I'd love them.
I mean, you got people in the room that should not be in the room together, traditionally in the body of Christ. You know, these streams have been separated for so long that never the twain meet. I mean, they have no awareness of what's going on in that stream or that stream. If you name a general over here in that stream, if I were to name Norval Hayes and some of these other camps, they look at me like, who are you talking about? Or Lester Summerall or Kenneth Hagin. They're like, oh, I think I've heard that name. You're like, what are you talking about? How have you never heard? And then they'll name someone that I've never heard of before.
It's like, how are you living your walk of faith with the Lord without knowing these things?
Somehow they've survived up until this moment. But we've got to come together. So one of the things I do in the book is in each chapter, I try to go through military history and show you an example of what was used to get victory. So if you love history, you're going to love the book. But as we entered into World War II, there was an interesting alliance that took place that the U.S. government denied for many years, but recent documents came out showing that it's true. The U.S. government was trying to get a foothold in Sicily. This was key for the battle. They were also concerned about German boats off the coast of New York. So they partnered with the Sicilian Mafia, Lucky Luciano. The American military and the Sicilian Mafia came together to fight against the Nazis as a result of patriotism, because they believed that it was important for the future. Now, if they could come together, if the Mafia and the American military could come together, how much more should we in different streams of the body of Christ be willing to set aside our petty differences and get in a room together and push this thing forward? And you know as well as I do, it's hard. It really is hard, because you get in the room with people who use words you're not comfortable with. They focus on things that you think are a little bit goofy, and maybe they are goofy. I don't know. But these ancillary issues have got to become that, ancillary. We've got to begin to make the main thing the main thing. And as we come together, this is what Satan fears the most. When we begin to come together, and there's a lot of resistance to that right now, but I don't know about you, I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it all over the body of Christ.